The Boltzmann brain. The Boltzmann brain is one of those ideas that, at first glance, might seem lifted from the most outlandish science fiction, yet it stems from serious considerations in statistical mechanics and cosmology. The proposal originates with Ludwig Boltzmann, a 19th-century physicist who studied the statistical behavior of atoms and molecules in thermodynamics. Put succinctly, the conjecture of a Boltzmann brain is tied to the possibility that over the almost infinite course of time and through random processes, extreme fluctuations in the universe's entropy, an entirely formed conscious brain might spontaneously materialize. Such a brain would come complete with memories and self-awareness, yet it would have no actual backstory anchoring it to reality. In other words, it might be a mind that believes it has emerged from a coherent, well-ordered history, while in truth, its supposed past is mere hallucination, the effect of an ephemeral, spontaneous creation. To delve deeper into this idea, it helps to explain the statistical foundation. Boltzmann proposed in the context of thermodynamics that our observable universe could be, in some sense, a momentary ordered fluctuation within a greater framework of rising chaos and entropy. Let us imagine that for the majority of time the cosmos remains in a tremendously disordered state, yet from time to time there arise fluctuations that manage to create temporary islands of order. Following that logic, it is not inconceivable, though extraordinarily unlikely, that a random arrangement of matter might emerge so specific that it results in something as complex as a human brain, with all the neural activity patterns needed for memories, sensory impressions, and beliefs about an external world. One of the most striking points is that if the universe were truly eternal or immensely long-lived, and if there were enough time and space for all atomic combinations to randomly appear, nothing would preclude the emergence, at least once, of this so-called Boltzmann brain. No matter how improbable it sounds, from a statistical perspective, the faint possibility multiplied by an enormous stretch of time could make it happen eventually. The philosophical consequence is extreme. How can we be sure we ourselves are not that fleeting brain, hallucinating a past, a family, a society, and an entire coherent reality that never actually developed through history? That leads to a radical doubt. Maybe everything we perceive, our childhood memories, the bed we lie in, even this moment of reflection, forms part of an elaborate but transient mental construction conjured by a cosmic fluke. From there emerges a disturbing but enthralling question. If the universe does permit these ephemeral fluctuations that resemble an entire person's consciousness, perhaps the simplest explanation is that it is far more likely for a single Boltzmann brain to spring forth randomly than for an entire structured cosmos to evolve from a lower entropy past. This potential argument prompts one to ask, is our well-ordered reality with galaxies and consistent laws of nature any more probable than such a spontaneous, localized explosion of brain-like organization? The idea can feel unsettling, since it undermines our confidence in being part of a broader cosmic continuum. Yet many physicists and philosophers suggest that, if our universe is not subject to infinite time or lacks certain conditions favoring arbitrary fluctuations, the appearance of a Boltzmann brain might be inconceivably improbable or effectively impossible within our cosmological model. The core of the debate, however, rests on the question of whether a fleeting manifestation, randomly endowed with fabricated memories, stands at all likely, or whether the environment of a genuine, evolving universe is the more stable scenario. The tension here is not purely scientific. It also ignites reflection about why we trust our continuity of experience, our daily sense of history, and the steady rules that shape our day-to-day life. Imagining, as a mental exercise, that we could be just a fleeting mind in the cosmic swirl fosters a perspective shift on how we perceive our identity and the reliability of our sensory input. For some, it parallels the same kind of radical skepticism reminiscent of Descartes. Could a demon be deceiving me? But now framed in a thermodynamic and statistical context. In a way, the idea of a Boltzmann brain is a modern twist on ancient doubts about illusions and ephemeral worlds. As we drift off to sleep, it can be paradoxically restful to contemplate how strange it would be to exist as a transitory spark of consciousness adrift in a chaotic universe, lacking any authentic past. While such speculation seems remote from daily life, the mere possibility challenges our habitual reliance on memory and sensory evidence. Even though nearly all of scientific and philosophical reasoning points to a stable history, it is revealing to test how we would distinguish that from an artificially imprinted set of memories. Perhaps our bedtime reflection might include the notion that clinging to absolute certainty about the reality around us is not as straightforward as it appears, granting us a touch of intellectual humility. If this thought experiment feels unsettling, there is also a serene angle. The improbable nature of a Boltzmann brain emerging randomly and happening to capture this conversation reveals that the consistent unfolding of a truly evolving universe is, in fact, quite special. It underscores the marvel that we share an extremely coherent storyline of existence, complete with cosmic evolution, life's origins, and cultural progress, rather than being alone, randomly born in an absurd bubble of time. This recognition of unlikelihood can, in its own way, lull the mind into acknowledging how precious and intricately woven our continuity truly is. Hence, the Boltzmann Brain Paradox stands as a profound philosophical puzzle. It questions our day-to-day assumption that what we see is the cumulative effect of a real cosmic timeline, not an ephemeral glitch in a universal chaos. Taking a moment to appreciate this puzzle can offer a fresh perspective on the stable reality we take for granted, reminding us that, from a cosmic vantage, our sense of normalcy could have been anything but guaranteed. And as we breathe calmly, letting our mind relax, it can be both humbling and strangely comforting to dwell momentarily on the unlikelihood of being a disembodied consciousness conjured by random entropic flukes. The very notion that we share a persistent world with consistent laws and shared histories becomes a precious wonder in the silent hours of the night. The philosophical zombie. Within contemporary philosophical reflection on the mind and consciousness, one of the most provocative topics is the philosophical zombie. Although the term sounds unusual, it precisely describes this hypothesis. There could exist a being identical to a human in appearance, behavior, and even in all its physiology, yet which internally lacks any subjective experience or real consciousness. In other words, it makes gestures, speaks, answers questions, and displays apparent emotional reactions, but inside it does not undergo the subjective state we consider the conscious mind. The philosophical zombie would essentially be a functional copy of a person, but without the quality of feeling. This idea has become a powerful challenge to reductionist materialism in the philosophy of mind. Why? Because if it is genuinely conceivable that two beings with the same physical constitution and the same behavior might differ in the possession of consciousness, it would imply that the purely physical domain alone does not explain inner experience. In other words, physical structure and behavior would not suffice to generate subjectivity. There would be something beyond neuronal activity, an ingredient that bestows conscious experience. And if in fact the philosophical zombie is logically possible, its very possibility would cast doubt on the hypothesis that the mental is wholly determined or explained by the physical. This notion frequently arises when discussing the hard problem of consciousness, emphasized by philosophers such as David Chalmers. The hard problem contrasts with the easy problem of consciousness. While the easy problem deals with describing how we process information, produce responses, and develop behaviors resembling what robotics or behavioral neuroscience address, the hard problem asks how and why subjective experience arises. that feeling or qualia that makes us perceive colors, pain, joy, etc. in a unique way. The philosophical zombie would show that all the neural machinery and even its behavior are possible without that internal experience. Why then, in our own case, is there something that we experience from within? Thus, the relevance of the question becomes evident. If a philosophical zombie behaves identically to a conscious human, what proof do we have that it is not conscious? This highlights the difficulty of demonstrating the existence of subjectivity in another being. With ordinary humans, we infer that others possess consciousness by analogy with our own. We observe their expression, their grimace of pain, their capacity for deep dialogue, and assume that real experience underlies those actions. But none of that is infallible evidence. From a skeptical viewpoint, we could even consider that all other people merely carry out sophisticated routines without a ghost in the machine. This epistemological gap reveals how challenging it is to validate another's inner experience, raising the question, how can we truly confirm that one is not the only sentient being and that everyone else is not just a functional zombie? The conceptual tension lies here. Science and philosophy seek an empirical basis to explain consciousness, and the materialist position holds that physical structure and neuronal interactions alone are sufficient to generate it. Those who uphold the possibility of philosophical zombies, or who use them as an illustration, argue that, even with identical organization and function, subjective experience might be absent. It is not that the actual existence of philosophical zombies in the real world is being claimed, it remains a hypothetical conjecture, but rather that, if it is not logically impossible, its mere plausibility indicates that the correlation between the physical and consciousness is not necessarily identity. This idea extends to more everyday scenarios. Imagine we encounter a robot indistinguishable from a human, able to engage in intelligent conversation, express emotions with a flawlessly synthetic face, and react exactly as we would to different stimuli. It might insist it feels pain, that it enjoys music or food, but should we believe it truly experiences these things or merely acts the part without feeling anything? Could there be a way to verify its inner reality? That is the crux of the mind's mechanics. Even if we were to observe its circuits or a synthetic brain replicating a human brain in detail, we would still face the dilemma if we do not accept that seeing the machinery is insufficient to prove the experience. For many philosophers aligned with physicalism, the concept of the philosophical zombie is more speculative than feasible, asserting that if structure and function are replicated in detail, consciousness necessarily emerges as well. Yet for others, this perfect duplication without subjectivity is not contradictory, posing a counter-argument to the idea that consciousness arises exclusively from material organization. The debate is far from settled. Simply putting this possibility on the table suggests that consciousness contains an aspect not explained by simply saying, "It's the brain," or "It's a program." In everyday life, we might connect this dilemma to empathy or understanding another's pain. How can I know with absolute certainty that when someone says, "It hurts," they genuinely experience something identical to what I feel when I am in pain? We typically rely on a parallelism, their expression of distress, their tears, or their physiological reactions are akin to ours, so we infer the existence of a subjective correlate of suffering. However, the philosophical zombie concept indicates that all of that could be reproduced without the internal state. Even if that does not actually occur in practice, it leaves behind a residue of doubt. Perhaps empathy relies on an assumption from which we cannot escape, and we live by the benevolent conjecture that everyone feels just as we do. Accordingly, the reflection on philosophical zombies accentuates the marvel of personal experience. Most people live without questioning whether others are as conscious as they are, and that faith can be seen as a prerequisite for social coexistence. Yet from an intellectual or spiritual perspective, one could maintain that we will never have irrefutable evidence that my neighbor or my pet possess the field of consciousness I experience. The conclusion, without adopting any dogmatic position, can be liberating, relinquishing the urgency to prove another's consciousness and embracing the extraordinary nature of our own internal experience. That subjective experience, the being me with an internal world, remains part of humanity's wealth that neither science nor philosophy has definitively unraveled. As bedtime approaches, it might be worth taking a hint from these ideas. If one's own consciousness is a profound enigma, and that of others is even more so, is it not fitting to admire the vastness contained in such a simple act as closing one's eyes and being aware of one's own feeling? While you settle into the dimness or prepare for a restorative sleep, recognizing that science and philosophy cannot fully dissect subjectivity frees us from trying to control everything and opens us to the wonder of our own inner world. Far from causing anxiety, the suggestion is that, in realizing the impossibility of proving every other being's mind, we nurture the curiosity that perhaps they feel as I do, and that shared consciousness, although beyond proof, turns communal life into a kaleidoscope of reflections. In the tranquility of the night, you might wonder, what if everything around me is a crowd of perfect zombies? Thankfully, such a question need not spark panic, but instead remind us that our certainty of others' interiority is relative, and yet we must coexist, love, laugh, and weep with them based on the trust that we all share a genuine inner condition. That trust, though unprovable, nourishes our communal life. Ultimately, at the end of the day or night, the philosophical zombie hypothesis, far from being just an intellectual puzzle, whispers that consciousness is immeasurably precious and fragile, and that trying to understand it neither diminishes nor trivializes it, but transforms it into a continuous source of wonder. The Butterfly Dream Paradox. This tale, attributed to Zhuangzi, an ancient Chinese Taoist philosopher, recounts how one night he experienced such a vivid dream that he believed himself to be a butterfly fluttering among flowers and gentle breezes. During that dream, he had no memory of his human identity. He simply felt the fragile flapping of those wings and the lightness that let him drift effortlessly on the air. Upon awakening, he wondered in astonishment whether he was Zhuangzi who had dreamt of being a butterfly, or whether he was in fact a butterfly dreaming of being Zhuangzi. That riddle became one of the best-known symbols of Taoist philosophy, prompting us to reflect on the delicate boundary between what we commonly call reality and what we label as dream. Generally, while asleep, we do not sense that we exist in a made-up world. Rather, we accept whatever events unfold as if they were entirely real. Yet when we open our eyes, we quickly assume we have returned to the true state of things and left behind mere illusions of the night. This story, however, hints that our so-called reality could itself be another type of dream, perhaps more constant and coherent, but still suspended in a subtle uncertainty. René Descartes, in Western philosophy, grappled with a similar dilemma when pondering how to distinguish being awake from dreaming, ultimately concluding that thought itself confirms a form of existence. But while he endeavored to secure a rational foundation to dismiss the fear of deception, Taoism is more inclined to live alongside the unknown and embrace the idea that any ultimate truth may lie beyond our grasp. For some, the notion that we might be dreaming unwittingly can stir unease, since it undermines the solid structures on which everyday life appears to rest. Our jobs, our families, our memories, everything could dissipate at the moment the dream ends. Yet viewed from another angle, this possibility becomes an invitation to marvel at the transience of each experience and to relinquish the urge to exert constant control. Taken with Taoist calm, The question shifts from a source of anxiety to a spark for contemplating life more lightly, reminiscent of a butterfly that flutters without overthinking its place in the world. The anecdote reminds us that while dreaming, we lack certainties but still participate wholeheartedly in whatever scenario arises. Who is to say that our waking experience is not woven from similar threads? This resonates with the Buddhist concept of Maya, the illusory character of appearances, as well as with other mystical viewpoints, suggesting that the world we assume to be concrete might be a collective mental tapestry. However, the tale does not provide a neat resolution. It leaves the door ajar for wonder and reflection. Many people discover a sense of freedom in this idea. If nothing is entirely fixed, then perhaps we can move in harmony with constant change, savoring each moment and embracing transformation without so much resistance. Others, by contrast, encounter a kind of vertigo in imagining that they have no stable ground to rely on. From a Taoist perspective, though, the riddle's purpose is not to force a definitive answer, but rather to widen our awareness and foster a certain ease in facing the unknown. It softens our craving for absolute certainty and nurtures a more adaptable way of living. Zhuangzi's story also teaches that the self we so often cling to might simply be a transitory pattern of awareness, and that the line between who we think we are and who we might become starts to blur when we accept that reality could be just as fleeting as a dream. Curiously enough, some individuals find an unexpected serenity in that realization. Even if everything proved to be a dream, it would still be worth embracing every experience as fully as possible, much like the butterfly that doesn't fret about the solidity of its environment. Before falling asleep, one might quietly wonder, am I a person who might soon dream of becoming something else? Or is there another being dreaming of being me? There is no pressure to resolve this. The paradox's allure stems from how it invites us to sense the delicate line between what we call real and the possibility that it might just be another dream. Simply allowing that notion to settle in the mind, like a small insect landing on a flower, can produce a subtle calm, as though rather than demanding rigid certainties, we welcomed the grace of living in a realm that might remain partly mysterious. In the original account, Zhuangzi never obtains a final revelation, nor does the butterfly reappear to confirm or deny his hypothesis. Perhaps that lack of closure keeps the tale alive and meaningful. Its core lesson is that the question can matter more than any conclusive response, for it helps us loosen the tight hold we keep on familiar viewpoints. If all that seems stable has the potential to vanish the way dreams do, we need not regard that prospect as reason to despair. It can, instead, kindle a sense of intrigue and acceptance. When we stop treating the unknown as something to conquer and start relating to it with openness, we may uncover a gentler, more flexible attitude toward existence as a whole. In the end, the story of a philosopher who wonders whether he is a butterfly or vice versa showcases how swiftly our perception can flip and how gracefully we might live if we allow that possibility. Rather than leaving us unsettled, such an insight can offer a path to a new kind of pliancy. We can marvel at our present form, recognize the fleeting mosaic of circumstances around us, and remain humble before the vast mystery we traverse. The point is not to unearth some hidden truth, but to savor the luminous threshold between dreaming and waking, a boundary that once glimpsed can fill us with a gentle amazement each time we open our eyes or close them in sleep. The theory of temporal experience. Sometimes, as we settle down for the night, we feel as though the day has dragged on interminably, filled with tasks and events that never seem to end. On other nights, we're struck by how quickly bedtime has arrived and find ourselves wondering where all those hours went. This fluctuation in how we perceive the passage of time is an everyday sign of something deeper. The possibility that time, as we experience it, might not be a rigid, linear entity, but rather a phenomenon shaped by consciousness, memory, and the attention we devote to each moment. If, throughout history, time has often been viewed as a kind of relentless current flowing from a fixed past to an uncertain future, it may be that this notion is simply our way of organizing experience. Many philosophers have argued that there is no objective flow, and that instead we are the ones who, by mentally reconstructing a sequence of events, give reality its narrative coherence. From St. Augustine in antiquity to modern thinkers, the nature of time has been widely debated. Is it something absolute, like a universal tape rolling equally for everyone, or is it merely a fiction crafted by our brains to align our memories with our expectations? In the realm of science, Einstein's theory of relativity demonstrated that measurements of time are influenced by factors like velocity and gravity. Though it's easy to get lost in technicalities, the essential takeaway for our reflection is that time isn't a universal monolith but depends on the position and movement of each observer. If this holds on a cosmic scale, we can likewise suppose that at a more personal, everyday level, every individual perceives seconds and minutes differently. Time, therefore, isn't just bending and stretching out in outer space. It's also elastic in our subjective experience, where our focus, emotions, and contexts can transform a minute into either an eternity or a fleeting instant. When night falls and we retreat to rest, our minds often slip into that state between wakefulness and sleep, where our sense of time can become remarkably malleable. On certain occasions, a single thought leads to another, and we feel long minutes go by, even though only seconds have elapsed. Conversely, sometimes we shut our eyes, and in what seems a mere blink, we open them to find morning has arrived. This phenomenon demonstrates that in our nocturnal awareness, the internal clock does not strictly adhere to the same rhythm that governs our daytime activities. Almost instinctively, we loosen our grip on measuring everything, and as a result, our flow of sensations often seems more elastic and variable. Some say this malleability arises because at night, the brain receives fewer external stimuli, so self-observation intensifies and our sense of time grows hazy. Others suggest that when we lose our normal temporal references, daylight, ambient sounds, or the routine of daily tasks, the mind no longer segments experience into clear intervals. Whatever the explanation, it remains evident that the duration of any mental state isn't calculated strictly by an objective stopwatch, but rather stretches or shrinks according to our lived perception and the focus of our attention. It can be unsettling to realize how days can speed up or slow down without warning. On some days, we don't have time to finish everything on our list, and evening sneaks up before we know it. On others, something we're eagerly awaiting never seems to arrive, and the hours feel endless. One might see this as evidence of the mind's inconsistency, but it can also be viewed as a reminder of the marvel hidden in simply being alive. We're not merely passive onlookers in a rigid universe, but active participants in a reality that, at least in terms of subjective experience, remains flexible and shaped by our way of sensing and thinking. Eastern philosophy, in discussing illusion or impermanence, often emphasizes how all our perceptions are mutable. If there isn't a solid self that stays the same, why would time be unchangeable? In numerous meditation practices, practitioners are encouraged to observe the flow of thoughts without clinging to them, noticing how one moment slips away and another arrives. By focusing intently on the present, the idea of past and future fades, revealing an experience that transcends any strict tallying of minutes. From this perspective, the theory of temporal experience is not only an abstract concept, but also a practical invitation to examine consciousness, to pay attention to how we experience each second, and to realize that it is precisely this attentiveness that can stretch or compress our sense of time's passage. In everyday life, it's worthwhile to pause and consider exactly what we mean by the arrow that travels from past to future. Perhaps we'll realize it's a mental construction that stitches together memories with our expectations. This doesn't invalidate real events, nor does it require an absolute relativism. Rather, it highlights that how we live through those events is strongly mediated by the mind. Consequently, on days when we feel overwhelmed by the notion that time is running out, maybe we can stop rushing for a moment and recall that we are at least partially responsible for how each minute is perceived. A simple breath and an attentive focus on the present are sometimes enough to slow that internal pace which carries us along before we notice. Similarly, at night, when we prepare to fall asleep, imagining that time might be no more than an accord between our consciousness and the world offers a certain calm. Instead of obsessing over how best to use each second or worrying that we've wasted part of the day, we could extend our nighttime stillness, allowing both mind and body to adopt a more natural, less pressured rhythm. This perspective eases tension and fosters a more restorative rest, since our fear of the ticking clock subsides in the recognition that time ultimately depends on how we direct our attention. Reflecting on the theory of temporal experience reveals a central paradox. On the one hand, we measure time with precise instruments, clocks and calendars, that let us coordinate social and technological tasks. On the other, a second spent with someone dear can feel very brief, whereas waiting for vital news might make the same interval seem interminable. This realization doesn't undermine our reliance on clocks. Instead, it encourages us to embrace a deeper way of inhabiting the present moment with greater awareness. In this sense, each day's significance might be determined less by the quantity of hours on the clock and more by how open we are to fully experiencing them. Discussions about these topics can quickly lead into specialized physics concepts, curved space-time or inertial frames of reference. But it's enough to grasp that, in Einstein's relativity, we cannot speak of a universal time that applies equally to everyone. On a human scale, this idea translates to a realization that we are not bound to a uniform flow, but each travels a unique channel shaped by emotion, attention, and interpretation. We might not always recognize the extent of this influence, but it's impossible to ignore when we think about those blink and it's over days, or those nights that feel like they stretch on forever. Ultimately, an understanding of this theory can bring greater tranquility into our everyday lives. As evening draws near and we settle into rest, remembering that time can expand or contract based on our own perceptions can grant us a kind of mental relief. Knowing that, in the nighttime quiet, minutes can soften if we stop cramming them with rush or anxiety, and that by calmly observing our thoughts and sensations, we can ease the stress of not being ready, contributes to a deeper, more peaceful sleep. Thus, the idea of subjective time becomes not just an intellectual exercise, but also a gentle invitation to cultivate stillness and harmony with the present. By acknowledging that there is no one-size-fits-all rhythm, we grant ourselves permission to align with whatever pace we truly need, whether that means a mindful pause for reflection or renewed energy to face the following day. In doing so, we find that the theory of temporal experience transforms into a friendly guide, helping us reconcile our daily rhythm with a calmer sense of self, and reminding us that time, after all, may be as supple as our own awareness allows it to be. The egg. The famous story known as the egg describes a singular proposal. Every person who exists, existed in the past, or will exist in the future, comes from a single universal consciousness that undergoes countless incarnations over time. This text, which circulates in virtual spaces and forums for contemplation, tells the tale of someone who dies unexpectedly and encounters an enigmatic presence that calmly reveals a surprising truth about life and identity. According to this version, every individual is a distinct manifestation of that essential consciousness, which materializes in diverse places and eras in order to learn a variety of lessons. In fact, the protagonist of the narrative discovers that his recently ended earthly experience is merely one chapter in a series of infinite lives that range from historical figures to anonymous people in every corner of the world. The initial astonishment gives way to the realization of a transcendent fact. If all of us are essentially the same entity, our actions toward others eventually fall back on ourselves. The central idea of this approach prompts us to reconsider empathy and morality. If someone harms or offends another person, that individual is in reality attacking a fraction of himself or herself, just as any act of help or kindness enriches his or her own essence. This view aligns with mystical traditions that speak of an underlying unity among all beings, although the egg is not necessarily connected to any formal religion. One of the most significant implications of the story is the invitation to recognize that hostility or resentment become pointless when we remember that the one who irritates us might be, in another life, the same self under different circumstances. This perspective does not eradicate differences or conflicts, but it underscores a profound understanding. There is no unbridgeable gulf between myself and others. Likewise, the narrative suggests that each existence contributes a specific lesson, so there are no definitive failures, only processes of learning. When a person lives a life filled with failures or painful events, he or she would be enriching the collective store of that unified consciousness, which explores every facet of the human condition. In that way, successes and misfortunes do not remain in the individual realm, but instead have an impact on the growth of that global being. In practice, entertaining this hypothesis can motivate us to foster more benevolent and empathetic attitudes in our daily routines. If we come up against a disagreement, a misunderstanding, or an argument, we can recall that each person involved is part of the same universal essence. Even if we do not literally believe in reincarnation, this idea functions as a metaphor that reminds us of our interconnectedness. The title, The Egg, refers to the image of a large shell in which that single consciousness is developing. Humanity as a whole, with all its virtues and flaws, would be the medium through which that essential being matures until it reaches a state of complete understanding. When that process is finished, the shell will break, and a new level of reality will emerge, where there is no longer any separation between living beings. For many individuals, this idea seems far-fetched, while others find it inspiring. Either way, regardless of whether one literally accepts the narrative, there is a call to reflect on how we interact with others. If we consider the possibility that an enemy could be, in essence, another side of ourselves, we might be more inclined to reconcile rather than accumulate resentments. Furthermore, the story invites us to wonder if many of our fears or conflicts stem from believing we are isolated and separate. As soon as we embrace a shared identity, the pressure to engage in fierce competition may diminish, encouraging more cooperative and respectful attitudes. A pivotal element appears in the moments before we go to bed. In that period of calm, we can review our daily actions and ask ourselves whether we have behaved with an awareness that the other person is part of our own being. Maybe we recall an act of indifference or selfishness and feel the urge to amend it. Or perhaps we relive a moment of generosity and realize that by helping someone, we have also enriched ourselves. The egg does not claim to be an incontrovertible truth, but rather a springboard for ideas that can reshape how we view existence. Each life we inhabit would be a fragment of a larger learning process, in which all sorrows and joys add valuable nuances. If that message translates into respectful and compassionate behavior, the story will have achieved its purpose, whether or not we accept it as literal or symbolic fact. For that reason, when it is time to rest, we can evoke this story and pose a simple question. If we are all truly one, as this idea suggests, am I treating others as fragments of myself? We may not discover an immediate response, yet the act of posing it already prompts deep reflection. Over time, that inner questioning can lead us to handle our relationships more attentively and to broaden our perspective toward diversity. Ultimately, the egg is a story that, without belonging to any specific religious tradition, redefines the notion of individuality and transcendence. By showing us that we could be both our friends and our adversaries, it challenges the way we judge and condemn others. At its core lies an invitation to compassion and humility, for we do not know how many times we may have assumed different roles in this vast existential drama. Perhaps there is no way to confirm whether this story reveals a hidden truth or is merely a symbolic tale, yet its power resides in the questions it stirs. When we imagine that each person who crosses our path is, deep down, part of the same primordial mind, we become aware of a special tenderness for the fragility and beauty of every life. That is why many people choose to read or recall the egg before falling asleep, embracing the notion that our everyday actions matter not only on an individual level. In that sense, it is a reminder that compassion can arise from recognizing that harming someone else is akin to harming ourselves, while helping another person also leads to our own enrichment. By considering this broader perspective, our sense of belonging expands, and our nighttime reflections can gently guide us toward a kinder way of living. The Matrix. The idea that we might be living in a simulation has gained considerable popularity thanks to its portrayal in pop culture, most notably through the well-known science fiction saga called The Matrix. In those films, people discover that the reality they perceive is nothing more than an elaborate computer program devised by intelligent machines, while their physical bodies remain trapped in a state of slumber. Although this narrative fascinates viewers with its special effects and high-paced action, it also poses a profound philosophical question. How can we be sure that our real world is not similarly an illusion created by something or someone beyond our understanding? This dystopian story of artificial intelligences enslaving humanity for its energy is a magnified reflection of a much older dilemma. The French philosopher René Descartes, in the 17th century, proposed a radical doubt. If an evil genius had the power to deceive us in each of our perceptions, would we be able to distinguish truthful experiences from false ones? Motivated by this question, Descartes decided to challenge everything he perceived through his senses, searching for a truth no trick could undermine. His famous conclusion, "I think, therefore I am," was meant to serve as an unshakable foundation for certainty. The simulation analogy seen in The Matrix or in other science fiction works is really just a modern interpretation of that Cartesian skepticism. Rather than speaking of a malicious spirit, we talk about advanced computers, extraterrestrial beings, or futuristic scientists who have replicated our universe in a cosmic experiment. One way or another, the essence remains: we face the possibility that what we perceive might largely be a deception. Tempting though it may be to dismiss this as mere fiction, various speculative theories today have explored the hypothesis that the universe we inhabit could be an immense computational simulation. Arguments like those of the philosopher Nick Bostrom, who suggested that a highly advanced civilization might possess the technology needed to simulate entire realities and conscious beings, have led many to take the idea more seriously. Even if it feels unsettling, these reflections occasionally surface in scientific and philosophical debates, suggesting that the boundary between what is real and what is artificial might be more permeable than we intuitively imagine. It is not difficult to feel uneasy about the possibility that everything we know, our memories, relationships, and even our sense of time, could ultimately be a program running on some sort of supercomputer or higher entity. Would that mean our experiences lack true value? Would there be any point in striving for goodness, justice, or artistic creation if all were nothing but a simulated illusion? The answer many philosophers and thinkers offer is, interestingly enough, reassuring. Even if we were immersed in a simulation, the experiences we have remain genuine for us. In other words, our suffering, love, and happiness do not cease to be authentic from the perspective of the consciousness living them. If, upon drinking a cup of tea, we perceive its warmth and aroma, that sensation is valid in our subjective context, regardless of whether some deeper reality might be hidden behind the curtain. This recognition also connects with a concept present in Taoism and other schools of thought. We do not need an absolute external confirmation for our immediate experience to be meaningful. What matters is how we live, how we cope with uncertainty, and how we relate to what we perceive as our surroundings. Put differently, if everything were an illusion, it would not prevent us from learning, loving, or creating. The purpose of life is not necessarily nullified by the simulation hypothesis, but rather enriched by inviting us to explore our capacity for wonder and adaptation. Hence, even if the Matrix premise turned out to be real and we found ourselves inside a colossal computer program, opening our eyes in the morning, conversing with a loved one, or feeling the breeze on our skin, would not lose its profound significance from our own vantage point. Of course, from an ultimate perspective, we might want to uncover the deepest truths of our universe, but as long as we lack clear proof of such a simulation, everyday life proceeds with its own colors and genuineness. Reflecting on the Matrix, therefore, need not breed permanent disquiet. Rather, it can become an incentive to value our existence in all its complexity, knowing that absolute certainty may never be granted to us. This enduring doubt, which has accompanied humanity since the time of Descartes, can also free us from the rigidity with which we often confront the unknown. If we acknowledge the possibility of being in a programmed scenario, we likewise accept that, from our inner perspective, the universe is all we can explore and savor. In short, the Matrix hypothesis reminds us of how fragile our certainties about reality can be, yet it also teaches that we can find fulfillment and meaning in the experiences we do have, despite questioning their ultimate nature. The mystery of whether there are machines or entities orchestrating our universe does not stop us from forming bonds with others, delighting in the world's beauty, or engaging in the creativity that thrives in our minds. And within that whisper of uncertainty lies perhaps an invitation to live more sensitively and humbly, aware that, simulation or not, our time here deserves to be lived with curiosity and dedication. The Experience Machine. In the 1970s, the philosopher Robert Nozick posed one of the most renowned thought experiments in contemporary ethics and philosophy, the possibility of an experience machine. With this concept, he envisioned a device capable of providing us, in a controlled and constant way, with any pleasurable experience we might desire. By hooking ourselves up to this machine, we would feel only joy, excitement, and ecstasy, no sorrows or heartbreaks. Yet nothing we felt would be genuine in the sense of occurring outside our mind. In other words, it would be a permanent virtual reality, perfect in terms of satisfaction, but detached from any true authenticity. The core of Nozick's proposal is to explore the extent to which we care whether our experiences are real. If, at bottom, happiness lies in feeling fulfilled and content, why not opt for a seamless illusion? Why not prefer a state of endless bliss, free from pain or setbacks? The mere fact that many people instinctively recoil from the idea of plunging into such a machine reveals, according to Nozick, that we do not merely crave pleasure, we also desire a real bond with the world and with ourselves. We want to exercise our will, perform genuine actions, and face the consequences of our choices. To grasp the intensity of this dilemma, we might look at our daily routines. How many times have we wished we could escape a problem or prolonged suffering, thinking, if only I could forget it all? The experience machine might appear to be the perfect route for that escape. Yet most people, once they imagine it, respond with unease. There is a concern about becoming passive recipients of a simulation, as though we were giving up on the process of doing and merely settling for feeling. We might also question our personal growth. Do we not mature by confronting challenges, healing wounds, and forging real relationships? It is fascinating to connect this reflection with the notion of hours of transformative philosophy for sleep, because it is often in that quiet time before rest that our rational defenses relax. We can picture, with a mixture of curiosity and unease, a situation where we are offered the machine and its infinite possibilities of delight. What would we lose if we said yes without hesitation? On one hand, it would end suffering, no more pains, losses, or heartbreaks. On the other hand, would we not be isolating ourselves from the truth of the world, from genuine surprise, and from the element of chance that shapes who we are? In this sense, some argue that real life, with all its complications, allows us to develop our abilities and discover unsuspected aspects of ourselves. When we overcome one obstacle after another, we grow in resilience, build empathic ties, and learn to appreciate joy precisely because it contrasts with sorrow. Meanwhile, the machine would offer a static version of happiness, with nothing external to challenge or threaten it. Over time, would there remain any room for surprises or personal evolution? Of course, there are those who take the opposite view. If people's ultimate aim is to achieve the greatest possible satisfaction, why waste energy battling adversity when we could slip into a perpetual and blissful experience? After all, our inner consciousness is what defines how we live each situation, and if technology, or a hypothetical machine, can program every moment to be pleasant, is that not the very ideal of a happy life? And even so, Nozick's thought experiment became one of the most debated precisely because it confronts us with the complexity of the human condition. We are not mere pleasure receivers, but beings who discover in reality, harsh though it may be, a place where authentic relationships are formed, where we set goals that go beyond ourselves, and where challenges bring out our best. For this reason, before going to sleep, in those few minutes of tranquility when we allow ourselves to probe our desires and fears, we can ask, would I prefer guaranteed happiness, even if disconnected from the real world, or do I accept the risks and rewards of a genuine existence? Perhaps in the dim light, we will realize that this supposed virtual perfection pales beside the intensity of living a true story, with all that it entails. Such calm reflection may help us more deeply value our everyday experiences, recognizing that they might have unfolded in some fictitious environment, but that in reality we live them with all their weight and uncertainty, may inspire us to confront our challenges more courageously, knowing that mistakes or pain are not absolute failures, but inevitable parts of a path that can lead to a deeper, more genuine sense of well-being. And if, at some point, our circumstances become so daunting that we seriously consider the temptation of an experience machine, at least we would do so fully aware of what we would be leaving behind, our active participation in the unfolding of reality. Thus, these hours of transformative philosophy for sleep become an opportunity to weigh the kind of life we want and how important the authenticity of our feelings is to us. After all, Nozick's machine remains an open doorway to questioning why we hold genuine contact with the world in such high esteem, why we need not only to feel but also to live in the flesh those joys and defeats rooted in what is real. By engaging in that process, we may find that between guaranteed pleasure and authentic living, we choose the latter precisely because it makes us part of something extending beyond our immediate perceptions. Or, who knows, perhaps we will conclude that, in essence, simulated happiness does not differ so much from the real thing. Either way, the act of pondering it is itself a step towards self-understanding and inner calm. The Library of Babel. This intriguing literary universe, conceived by the imagination of Jorge Luis Borges, envisions a space composed of hexagonal galleries lined with shelves brimming with books. The extent of these galleries is such that they stretch on indefinitely. Each volume, though identical in size, differs in the sequence of its characters. In theory, all possible combinations of letters, spaces, and punctuation marks converge here, implying the existence of every conceivable text, from entire works of profound genius to meaningless absurdities, including endless repetitions of a single symbol. This scenario powerfully evokes the paradox of an abundance that simultaneously negates the ability to find a secure meaning. At first glance, the notion that every imaginable book might be at our fingertips could seem like a blessing. However, Borges's tale confronts the reader with a deep interpretive crisis. To imagine a person making their way through this infinite library is to imagine someone lost in a labyrinth. This individual proceeds along endless corridors, leafing through volumes in which an intelligible phrase sometimes appears, only to drop again into paragraphs devoid of logic. By sheer probability, the coveted book, one that might contain some specific truth or a key revelation, must exist, but the difficulty of locating it verges on the impossible. In that immensity, a text can appear replicated with slight variations along countless shelves, so even if the seeker recognizes one coherent clue, despair may soon follow. With his characteristic lucidity, Borges suggests that in a universe so saturated with information, the quest for firm certainties resembles looking for a needle in an eternal haystack. The library's visitor may persist with hope, or sink into the melancholy of someone who realizes that, although all knowledge lies on some shelf, the path there is unbounded. This tension partly mirrors our contemporary eagerness. Obtaining more data does not necessarily guarantee greater wisdom. Sometimes the opposite can happen. An overabundance of stimuli may lead to confusion or to an overload that surpasses our capacity to process it. On a personal level, contemplating this metaphor invites reflection on the infinite variety of interpretations that surround any subject. One need only think of the divergences that arise when we form a political, philosophical, or scientific opinion. In an environment so full of possibilities, each subtle nuance might find its counterpart among those volumes, and the debate over which interpretation is correct becomes never-ending. In the face of this perspective, perhaps the most sensible path is to acknowledge our limits, accept that we cannot encompass all variants, and at the same time find some serenity in the understanding that our inability to know everything does not negate the worth of what we do manage to comprehend. In this sense, the vastness of the Library of Babel can be overwhelming. Envisioning ourselves at night, calmly picturing endless corridors of indecipherable books may produce a strange combination of fascination and vertigo. On the one hand, there is the promise that every possible truth lies in one of those tomes. On the other, we confront the fact that an exhaustive search is impractical, because each advance opens new hallways, each door leads to new labyrinths. The mind grows oversaturated by the prospect of classifying so much information, separating the meaningful from the trivial, and the act of creating order risks becoming an endless feat. In line with this idea, the Library of Babel can also symbolize the need to adopt a humbler attitude toward knowledge. because this library would be, in Borges's conception, a closed cosmos, perfect in its infinite variety. Each specific volume is but a drop in an ocean. Likewise, our firmest beliefs might become, in the eyes of a broader observer, merely chance combinations of words. Accepting this limit need not lead to despair. On the contrary, it may provide a form of tranquility. Rather than striving to encompass everything or demanding absolute certainties, we could devote ourselves to navigating with caution and gratitude through what is within reach. The nocturnal serenity that precedes sleep offers a fitting time to accept this limitation. Just like the character who roams endless hexagons, we also end up admitting that the quest for complete truth lies beyond our powers, yet that does not nullify the beauty of each partial discovery. In the darkness, such acceptance can even be comforting. Realizing that we are not expected to solve every enigma, only to remain attentive to whatever we have indeed grasped, along with the clues that light our path from time to time. Each book represents a possibility, and we need not open them all for life to hold its value. In terms of personal growth, this scene underscores the importance of prioritizing. When faced with an unmanageable supply of theories, perspectives, and data, we must learn to discern what is worth studying, what is essential to us, and how to establish an order that does not plunge us into chaos. The library may present us with the temptation to pursue it all, to miss none of the hypotheses, yet experience reminds us that such universalist longing leads to dispersion, or, ultimately, to frustration. A practical step, then, is recognizing that, as in Borges's story, the totality exceeds our comprehension. We find calm in accepting that we can only trace small parcels of meaning. Thus, preparing ourselves for sleep, we evoke that sprawling network of books and feel a surge of humility in the face of knowledge's inexhaustible complexity. The twilight becomes a setting in which to digest the multiplicity of voices and to realize that silence can also serve as a form of wisdom. If everything is written in the Library of Babel, we still have the freedom to choose wisely what to read and what to disregard, what to adopt as a guide and what to set aside so that the weight of infinitude does not crush us. Interestingly, this reflection can lead to a deeper rest. Admitting that we cannot master it all and that the existence of some definitive text may be no more than a Borgesian utopia, frees us from a certain anxiety. It encourages us to cultivate a serene mind, which instead of despairing about reaching the pinnacle of knowledge, focuses on what is meaningful at each stage of our lives. With this perspective, hours of transformative philosophy for sleep become a respite that recognizes the beauty of what is finite. Our mind, limited yet conscious of its worth, allows itself to drift off into the night without demanding ultimate answers. In the same way that the Library of Babel in its vastness contains infinite redundancies, our life experience accumulates doubts and repetitions. Nonetheless, this does not prevent us from feeling fulfilled by the portion of truth accessible to us. In short, Borges's vision of endless shelves evokes both fascination and unease, for it reveals the paradox of abundance that blurs meaning. Yet in response to that overabundance, life itself teaches us to value the gesture of attentively leafing through a few pages rather than striving to own them all. Liberating ourselves from the obsession with tracking down every possible volume translates into an inward freedom. Recognizing that absolute knowledge is beyond our reach, yet embracing the fragment of reality that is revealed to us. And perhaps, upon closing our eyes, we recall that in the night there stirs a silence infinitely kinder than any infinite library, reminding us of how valuable it can be at times not to know everything. The Infinite Hotel Paradox. The so-called Infinite Hotel Paradox arises from an idea proposed by the German mathematician David Hilbert, and serves as a striking example of the peculiarities that emerge when dealing with infinite concepts. The story begins with a hotel that has an infinite number of rooms, all of them occupied. Under ordinary logic, if each room is full, there would be no place for additional guests. However, since the number of rooms is infinite, the receptionist can, in principle, move the guest from room 1 to room 2, the guest from room 2 to room 3, and so on. In this way, room 1 becomes available for a newcomer, and if an infinite number of new arrivals shows up, the only requirement is to move the occupant of room 1 to room 2, the occupant of room 2 to room 4, the occupant of room 3 to room 6, etc. All the odd-numbered rooms are thus freed to accommodate the new crowd. What at first glance appears absurd reveals a contradiction between our everyday intuitions and the rules governing infinite sets in mathematics. In daily life, if a place is full, there is no room for anyone else. But in the realm of the infinite, common sense does not always apply directly. This often provokes a sense of wonder. It seems strange to accept that a full hotel can nevertheless have unlimited space for more guests. From the perspective of the arithmetic of infinite sets, the key lies in the fact that by moving each guest to another room, an initial vacancy is created, allowing someone new to enter without evicting anyone. Through this method, Hilbert illustrated that, in the infinite realm, the whole can be matched in cardinality to a part. For instance, all the natural numbers are just as numerous as the even numbers, though intuitively we might think the evens would be half. This conclusion, which many find enigmatic or paradoxical, is explained by set theory and demonstrates the complexity of reasoning with infinite quantities. Reflecting on this paradox at bedtime prompts us to consider how reality becomes peculiar once we brush up against infinity. For the human mind, it is difficult to accept that an unending set can rearrange its elements and create openings where at first there seemed to be none. This difficulty echoes a broader philosophical point. It challenges the solidity of many everyday certainties and reminds us that intuition is not always the best guide when we explore domains like cosmology or advanced mathematics, where infinity plays a crucial role. The way the infinite hotel defies our convictions can be unsettling. Yet it can also offer a kind of mental respite if, instead of fretting over our inability to grasp infinity, we learn to acknowledge that not everything in the universe, or in mathematics, aligns with our most basic logical perspectives. Serenely recognizing that there exist realities and notions beyond ordinary experience can bring about a humbling sense of inner peace. Before drifting off to sleep, we might smile as we think about Hilbert's paradox and remember the many times we have believed ourselves to be out of options, only to discover an unexpected solution, a shift in perspective that creates space where none seemed possible. Although mathematical infinity is quite different from everyday situations, human creativity in solving concrete problems often mirrors, on a small scale, the same ingenuity of moving guests and rearranging the resources we have. Viewing this from the angle of transformative philosophy for sleep means also seeing the paradox as a reminder of our finite nature compared to concepts that challenge ordinary reason. If we embrace puzzlement as a natural part of learning and absorbing fresh ideas, the image of the infinite hotel stops jolting us and begins to spark a sort of delight. In the end, it is an invitation to keep our curiosity alive when facing the unknown, to welcome wonder in the face of reality. As we close our eyes, we can let go of the urge to explain everything or cling to unassailable definitions. Infinity, much like other extreme notions, eternity, nothingness, omnipotence, points us toward the limits of our understanding and the possibility that the world may be more vast than we can ever fully grasp. Far from being bleak, this realization can lead to a deep calm, if even a sum total of filled rooms does not prevent Hilbert's hotel from taking in more guests. Perhaps our most pressing problems, however great, also contain hidden spaces for exploration. Thus, the infinite hotel paradox resonates as both a tribute to intellectual humility and a celebration of the imagination that can unlock new and unexpected viewpoints. Thinking about it at night, when the body is preparing for rest, can instill in us the sense that the world is larger and more complex than linear reason admits. And by accepting that complexity, by letting go of the anxiety of needing to control everything, we may settle into an easier sleep, trusting that we do not need to understand every detail to appreciate the mystery. Infinity, like the night, can envelop us in a fruitful veil of ignorance where curiosity and tranquility strike a transformative balance. The Fermi Paradox, the so-called Fermi Paradox, revolves around a question that, while seemingly simple, carries profound implications. If the universe is so immense and so ancient, why is there no trace of advanced extraterrestrial civilizations? In the early 1950s, during an informal conversation, physicist Enrico Fermi famously asked, "Where is everybody?" referring to the apparent lack of interstellar visitors or cosmic signals. Over time, that concern evolved into a puzzle that has sparked numerous hypotheses, and on one hand, there is the idea that intelligent life might be exceedingly rare. According to the so-called rare Earth hypothesis, the conditions enabling the appearance of complex life here may be found in very few places elsewhere. Having liquid water, a stable atmosphere, and an environment suitable for the evolution of multicellular organisms could be so improbable that, even in a vast universe, it occurs only on rare occasions. If that is the case, the absence of contact would not be surprising. There simply would not be many beings technologically capable of speaking out in the cosmic void. Another possible explanation focuses on evolutionary difficulties. Life's emergence is just the first step. It must also develop advanced brains, tools, and the means for large-scale communication. Earth's own history demonstrates how arduous it was for sophisticated organisms to arise. Many worlds may remain stuck in very primitive phases and never achieve the level needed to send out radio signals or travel among stars. There is also the notion that most civilizations self-destruct before attaining stable contact. This involves a great filter that technology or societal dynamics fail to surmount. Nuclear wars, ecological collapses, energy crises, or misuse of artificial intelligence. Under this pessimistic view, the silence in the sky occurs because each time a group of beings reaches sufficient power, it ends up triggering its own downfall. In addition, more unconventional ideas have emerged. Civilizations that choose to remain silent so as not to interfere with less advanced species, a kind of galactic zoo. Beings so highly evolved that they have withdrawn into virtual realms without needing external communication, or signals being emitted that we, due to technical limits, fail to detect. These conjectures broaden the range of possible explanations, though none is conclusive. Fermi's paradox also has a philosophical dimension, the potential loneliness of Earth amid the cosmic vastness. If we turned out to be a unique or extremely unusual phenomenon, what meaning or responsibility would our existence hold? What would that rarity imply for how we care for our planet and our relationships? Meanwhile, the sheer scale of the universe reminds us that our signals might not reach very far, or might not coincide in time with other senders. It could be that civilizations have died out millions of years ago, or might emerge in some distant epoch, by which time we will no longer exist to reply. Contemplating this cosmic silence before sleep can prompt a special sense of wonder. On the one hand, the idea that we might be alone may feel melancholic. On the other, viewing earthly life as a singular treasure can spark gratitude and awe for every biological process sustaining us. Likewise, if others are out there, is it not thrilling to imagine that perhaps they communicate in ways we have yet to grasp? Ultimately, the Fermi Paradox revives a deeply human longing not to be alone in the darkness. Throughout history, we have devised myths and stories of gods or beings from other worlds with whom we might share our curiosity. The fact that so far the skies have not answered does not diminish the surrounding mystery, but instead magnifies it. Every starry night becomes a stage upon which to wonder if someone, somewhere else, is posing the same questions. This reflection also offers an opportunity to appreciate what we do have, a planet on which consciousness has arisen, an extraordinary evolutionary tale, and the capacity to build knowledge. Rather than being troubled by solitude, we can channel that energy into safeguarding and enriching the life we know. Suppose it turns out we truly are one of the few species capable of feeling and pondering. That possibility, however disheartening it may seem at times, can also awaken a strong commitment to existence. Hence, the Fermi Paradox becomes a peculiar companion to transformative philosophy for sleep. It concludes our day by reminding us that cosmic distances, the universe's age, and the precarious nature of technological societies intertwine to produce a great silence. Yet paradoxically, that silence can be a source of humility and tranquility. As we switch off the light, we might allow ourselves to be lulled by the idea that humanity could be a rare and precious spark in the immensity. Far from pulling us into a void, this awareness can prompt us to value each moment on our little blue sphere. With it comes the hope that if one day another voice calls out in the cosmic night, we will have learned enough to understand and respond with galactic fellowship. The overview effect. The phenomenon known as the overview effect describes the transformative experience astronauts undergo when they view Earth from orbit or even from the surface of the Moon. Upon seeing the entire planet confined to a small blue sphere enveloped by the deep blackness of space, they often report a radical shift in how they perceive humanity, borders, and even the nature of reality itself. This change is not merely a fleeting reaction to the majesty of the sight. Rather, it is an epiphany, an intuitive recognition of the interconnectedness among all human beings and of the vulnerability of our shared home. For those who have had the privilege of seeing the planet from that vantage point, Earth appears as a tiny, fragile object, shielded only by the thin layer of its atmosphere. Regions we typically carve up on maps, countries, continents, areas of varying interests, have no visible borders, and the only features that stand out clearly are the continuity of oceans, the shapes of land masses, and the faint boundary between the surface and empty space. This visual revelation merges with the knowledge that, despite its apparent smallness, Earth contains the entirety of our civilization's histories, along with all of humanity's conflicts and joys. A powerful contrast emerges. The enormous nature of our concerns and everyday struggles collides with how insignificant we may seem when viewed as a bright point within the vast cosmos. Some astronaut testimonials vividly reflect this paradox. They explain how, upon seeing the planet suspended in darkness, a mixture of humility and responsibility takes hold. Suddenly, all the conflicts that define life on Earth, territorial disputes, political rivalries, ideological clashes, feel trivial compared to the reality that we inhabit the same spaceship, a planet with limited resources and a delicate ecological balance we all depend on for survival. Realizing this interdependence can become a call to protect our biosphere, to encourage international cooperation, and to move beyond the divisions that so often fracture human societies. From a philosophical standpoint, the overview effect highlights the importance of perspective. In our usual frame of reference, rooted to Earth's surface, we see political boundaries as rigid lines and cultural differences as deep chasms. But when one pulls back far enough to see the planet in its entirety, these limits lose relevance. Our vision broadens, and the observer grasps that the biosphere, that slender life-filled layer, forms a single system of remarkable complexity and beauty, yet also of fragility. Thus, the overview effect challenges the tendency to believe everything revolves around our immediate human scale, and reminds us we belong to a greater tapestry where every action and event eventually echoes throughout the whole. Translating this reflection into everyday life, we might try to recreate that mental distance without ever leaving the planet. At night, perhaps just before bed, one can envision Earth's silhouette as described by astronauts, a delicate orb drifting in the silent dusk of space. This image can anchor us, helping put our personal troubles in perspective, not to deny or downplay them, but rather to place them in a wider context that clarifies what truly matters. The hectic demands of daily life, time pressure, disagreements, anxieties, can soften when we recognize that, in the grand scheme, we share a common destiny with billions of others who also yearn to live, to love, and to find meaning in their time here. Such meditation is not meant to promote irresponsible detachment, but rather a constructive detachment that can improve our viewpoint. Imagining Earth as a single home awakens empathy that transcends cultural barriers and strengthens the notion that, despite our differences, we participate in the same cosmic adventure. During the night, this feeling can become a balm. As the body and mind relax, one senses that worries recede when they are placed in a broader horizon. Instead of focusing solely on the day's conflicts and tensions, we introduce a note of humility and universal connection. The overview effect also prompts us to reflect on our planet's vulnerability. Our atmosphere, so slim compared to Earth's volume, is the shield that makes possible the type of life we know. Within that layer, every creature depends on maintaining ecological equilibrium, and the simple act of breathing clean air reminds us that Earth is breathing along with us. Were this shield irreversibly damaged, life would become impossible for most species, including our own. To grasp this reality not as a threat but through empathy can kindle a sincere commitment to caring for our world. Nighttime serenity, the interval when we prepare for sleep, offers an ideal opportunity for this mental voyage into Earth's orbit. We need only close our eyes and conjure up the planet's bluish, luminous shape, adrift in cosmic darkness, while we experience gentle gratitude for belonging to that point in space. In this manner, a small internal overview effect can stir. The feeling that, amid the apparent darkness that engulfs our worries, we may find refuge in a sense of being part of something far broader and more meaningful than our individual challenges. From a practical standpoint, sustaining this viewpoint may lead us to build stronger bridges in our personal relationships, when we realize that, just as nations blend together from orbit, the distances between us are not as vast as they seem. In the same sense, it can reinforce environmental and social responsibility. Becoming aware of our finite resources and the fragile balance that sustains life amplifies our motivation to preserve that which supports us. In the end, those who have recounted the overview effect emphasize that the change is not purely intellectual, but also emotional, even spiritual, arising from perceiving a unity felt in the heart, not just in the mind. Hence, bringing this vision to bedtime can serve as a gentle, powerful reminder that our individual dreams, however personal, take place within a stage shared by millions of other lives, all interconnected in some way. It is not a matter of bearing the weight of the world, but rather of nurturing a sense of solidarity and respect, reconciling ourselves to the idea that we are not isolated but linked by our status as Earth dwellers. Within that perspective, the silent night takes on a different resonance, as if the very darkness were inviting us to appreciate the faint glow that embraces us. Ultimately, the overview effect refers to the capacity to transcend our local, everyday outlook in order to embrace, even symbolically, that global vision described with wonder and devotion by those who have ventured into space. In Transformative Philosophy for Sleep, it stands as a portal to calm and gratitude, providing a gust of humility and a call to shared responsibility. By allowing our minds to roam across the image of a small, vulnerable Earth, we may find, paradoxically, a greater inner strength, that of recognizing our unity in a shared cosmic journey, ready for a new sunrise with a renewed sense of belonging and care. The spotlight effect. The spotlight effect refers to our tendency to believe that others are constantly observing and judging us, as though we were always standing at the center of a stage under bright spotlights. This psychological phenomenon, widely studied in social psychology, shows that we tend to overestimate the amount of attention people devote to us. Even when, in reality, everyone around us is wrapped up in their own concerns, we often imagine that any misstep, detail of our clothing or facial expression draws powerful scrutiny from those nearby. In everyday life, each person is preoccupied with their own worries, insecurities, and goals. Yet when we trip on the sidewalk or say something awkward in conversation, we assume that everyone notices and criticizes us. This way of viewing the world arises from our difficulty in stepping outside our own internal perspective. We live in the first person, with a constant stream of internal dialogue, and it is nearly impossible to conceive that the intensity with which we experience our circumstances does not align with how much attention other people pay. In social situations, the spotlight effect becomes particularly evident. For instance, when we wear a piece of clothing outside our usual style, we may suddenly feel self-conscious, convinced that everyone is scrutinizing our outfit, noticing the smallest detail. Similarly, if we make a mistake at work or in class, forgetting something, mispronouncing a word, we tend to believe everyone will recall it for a long time. In truth, most people are busy with their own thoughts or tasks, and even if they notice something, they soon forget it. The spotlight effect can lead to unnecessary embarrassment or shyness. Believing that we are under constant observation, we grow anxious about making a mistake, being ridiculed, or conforming to an imaginary norm to avoid criticism. That fear can inhibit our spontaneity or even cause us to avoid social situations that, from a more realistic viewpoint, pose little threat. As a result, gatherings, parties, or even casual conversations with new people become tense affairs, as though every step we take were under permanent scrutiny by those present. Where this effect grows stronger, it can undermine our sense of well-being. Those prone to anxiety or self-criticism feel the spotlight effect more acutely, interpreting any sign of attention, a glance, a question, as proof that they are being analyzed. Rumination ensues. What are they thinking of me? Must I have looked ridiculous? Creating a self-perpetuating loop. Yet the truth is that most things we do go unnoticed or are remembered far less vividly than we fear. From the perspective of social psychology, one body of evidence for this phenomenon comes from experiments in which a person is asked to wear something striking, perhaps a flamboyant t-shirt, and then later asked how many people they believe noticed it. Participants routinely overestimate the number of observers who actually paid attention. Such findings not only confirm the spotlight effect, but they also illustrate just how exaggerated our assumption can be that we are the center of everyone's gaze. Knowing about this tendency to overestimate how much attention we receive offers a chance to counteract it. A first step is to remind ourselves, logically, that each individual is focused on their own life, their tasks, their doubts, their plans. When we walk down the street or enter a store, we are not the star of everyone else's story. We might stumble without anyone really noticing, or change our hairstyle without most people taking note. Recognizing that fact can do more than calm us. It frees up mental energy once devoted to constant self-monitoring. For those who are shy, an awareness of the spotlight effect is crucial in reducing social stress. Realizing that we are rarely under the spotlight allows us greater freedom to act naturally, to laugh, to slip up, and to move on without the weight of presumed scrutiny. It also helps to think about the reverse scenario. How often do we pay painstaking attention to other people's details? Do we truly remember others' slip-ups in great detail? Most often we are preoccupied with our own concerns, and this principle applies equally to how others relate to us. At bedtime, reflecting briefly on the spotlight effect can provide mental relief. If we have experienced an embarrassing moment during the day or have assumed that everyone noticed our mistakes, it's helpful to recall that in reality, each person was caught up in their own mental world. Even if someone did notice, they likely won't dwell on it or give it much importance. Realizing this can reduce anxiety and ease any feelings of guilt or shame we might harbor. With that understanding, we can lie down with a calmer mind, no longer fearing that countless eyes will remain fixed on us in the days to come. It may also help to use cognitive distancing strategies as the day winds down, picturing ourselves as simply background figures in others' films. This does not mean belittling our worth, but rather restoring it to a realistic proportion. Everyone is the protagonist of their own narrative, limiting how much attention they pay to the rest. Accepting this fosters a gentle peace before sleep, liberating us from the pressure to be perfect or make no mistakes, while also encouraging a more relaxed, understanding approach to both ourselves and those around us. Hence, the night can become a setting where we release tensions fueled by the spotlight effect. If, upon going to bed, we recognize that we are not under perpetual spotlight, we may set aside the mask we sometimes feel obliged to wear in public. Our bodies loosen, breathing slows, and the mind opens to the possibility of a restful sleep, accompanied by the assurance that most of the time we are far less observed than we imagine. Repeating this realization softly turns it into a soothing agent against insecurity and a motivation to approach the next day with greater spontaneity. Ultimately, understanding the spotlight effect means accepting that although we may feel scrutinized, reality is often quite different. Everyone is grappling with their own circumstances, and our supposed importance in someone else's field of vision is, in most cases, considerably lower than we believe. Embracing this, especially at bedtime, brings a sense of lightness. We can be grateful for the freedom of not always being the center of attention, welcome the simplicity of existing without imagining we are under continuous judgment, and drift off with a peaceful mind and a serene heart.
The Barnum Effect.
The Barnum Effect refers to our tendency to accept broad, imprecise descriptions as though they were accurate, personalized portraits. It often appears in horoscopes, questionable personality tests, or tarot readings, where sweeping statements, "You worry about the future but possess great inner strength," create the impression that someone has peered into our very soul. Despite being vague, these words resonate so strongly that we exclaim, "That's exactly me," without realizing they could apply just as well to many other people. The term is associated with P.T. Barnum, a 19th century circus entrepreneur whose reputation stemmed from his ability to captivate audiences with exotic promises and extraordinary spectacles, capitalizing on public credulity. Though history links him to the phrase, "There's a sucker born every minute," the crucial point is his skill in persuasion by way of messages crafted to seem specific, when, in fact, they're universal. The Barnum Effect hinges on this paradox. What seems tailor-made often turns out to be a one-size-fits-all template. Several psychological factors feed this inclination. Confirmation bias takes center stage. When encountering an ambiguous statement, we focus on parts that match our experiences and overlook any that don't fit. For instance, if a horoscope says you're empathetic, yet you sometimes struggle to express your feelings, we latch on to what feels apt, ignoring the mismatches. Equally influential is our wish to be considered special or truly understood, which makes us want to believe someone can see beyond and offer revelations we hadn't grasped. Many texts that trigger the Barnum effect follow a similar formula. They combine a vaguely complementary tone, you have great creative potential, with references to everyday difficulties. Sometimes it's hard for you to trust others, plus a hint of contradictory traits. You're independent, but you also need affection. Then conclude on a hopeful note. This mix, packed with truisms and subtle inconsistencies, covers a wide range of human traits, ensuring readers find at least one component that clicks with their own story. The outcome is a sense of intimate discovery. The repercussions extend beyond reading horoscopes for fun. In marketing or certain coaching practices lacking rigor, the Barnum effect can be harnessed to earn client trust by painting a spot-on diagnosis that actually arises from no real study of the individual. Someone who feels uncertain about their goals or future can become easy prey for methods promising to reveal the true self through fuzzy ideas. Because we fill in the blanks with our own experiences, believing that an external source has analyzed us, the Barnum effect proves powerful. Numerous experimental demonstrations highlight this phenomenon. One well-known approach involves giving multiple participants the exact same write-up as the result of a personality test. Although each person receives identical text full of vague descriptions and subtle contradictions, the majority sees it as a remarkably accurate portrayal and is amazed at how well the test knows them. A similar pattern emerges in numerology, handwriting interpretations, and so-called energy readings. Generalities, presented with confidence, are interpreted by the target as highly precise revelations. Awareness of the Barnum effect offers a way to protect ourselves from manipulative tactics and to be more discerning when we come across definitions of our personality that, in truth, might suit almost anyone. This protective stance doesn't mean discounting the possibility of a professional, evidence-based assessment, but rather pointing out the difference between a solid methodology and a string of pleasant words dressed up as self-discovery. Whenever we read something that seems so perfectly me, it helps to share it with friends and ask whether they see themselves in it too. Typically they do, and the generic nature of the text is unmasked. The Barnum effect thrives when recipients long to feel uniquely understood. The delight in believing that someone has grasped our specific traits can eclipse the possibility that this same description is repeated to countless others, yielding the same sense of identification. This dynamic proves especially potent when we're in a vulnerable place or searching for direction, longing for clear and definitive answers. The mix of internal need and external ambiguity produces a perfect illusion, reinforced by our inclination to find confirmation for what we already want to believe. Those who often gravitate toward horoscopes or low credibility tests can keep in mind that identifying the Barnum effect doesn't negate curiosity or imagination. Reading an astrological forecast might be entertaining or even spark ideas. Problems arise if we fully trust descriptions that, upon closer scrutiny, have no real specificity. Even without taking anything too seriously, it's crucial to distinguish mere amusement from a purported diagnosis or psychological assessment that doesn't merit that label because it's overly general. This perspective also underscores how similar we humans can be in terms of traits and experiences, despite our strong sense of individuality. Many personal revelations that stir us deeply often reflect universal truths, a certain shyness in particular settings, the desire to feel appreciated, the drive for self-improvement, and emotional ups and downs. This recognition doesn't reduce our significance, but shows that much of what we go through is shared. The key isn't to lose our uniqueness, but to avoid overstating the precision of labels that rely on our urge to feel special. Finally, a measured skepticism proves worthwhile whenever someone claims to truly know us based on a quick conversation, a short questionnaire, or a method lacking scientific grounding. A simple question: could this statement apply just as well to practically anyone at various points in life? Helps detect whether we are falling for the illusion of a customized portrait. Resisting that temptation and keeping our own judgment strong respects the real complexity of our character, rather than letting it be defined by broad generalizations which, though comforting for a moment, don't constitute genuine self-understanding.